Good day, everyone. Our assigned reading for Philo171 is entitled A Woman's Place in Man's Life Cycle. Before discussing the topic, let me first introduce the woman behind this piece of literature, Carol Gilligan. Carol Gilligan was born on November 28, 1936, in New York City. She studied literature in college, received her master's degree in psychology from Radcliffe, and received her PhD from Harvard in 1964. She worked alongside Erik Erikson and Lawrence Kohlberg as a Harvard professor. While working as a research assistant for Kohlberg, she began to focus on moral dilemmas and development of young girls. And because of her dedication, her works in the areas of women's advancement and moral psychology have been recognized by numerous activists, institutions, and organizations. Aside from that, she has won numerous awards along with being named one of Time magazine's most influential people in the year of 1996. In 1979, she wrote The Woman's Place in Man's Life Cycle, using literary and psychological resources to show how various theories about the human life cycle fail to account for women's experiences by using men's lives as their paradigm, and arguing that this bias favored autonomy and achievement above attachment and intimacy. She stated that systematic attention to women's experiences in both theory and research will allow integration of these concerns into a more balanced picture of human development. To start with her argument, Gilligan presented an example using a play by Anton Chekhov entitled The Cherry Orchard. In the second act, Lopakin, I'm so sorry, I don't know the pronunciation. He is a young merchant who failed to convince Madame Ranevsky to cut down her orchard to save her estate. And he instead bought it himself in the third act and built the summer cottages in its place. And by purchasing the orchard where his father and grandfather were former servants, he wanted to remove the awkward, unhappy life. And replacing it with cottages will provide the future generations to see a new life. In elaborating his vision, he also declared that despite Russia's natural beauty, he is disappointed in its people, and he believes that the individuals who populate it should be giants. And because of that, she warned him that giants uh, are only good in fairy tales, but in other situations, they only cause fear. From this excerpt, we can see that gender plays a role in one's perspective. And the way we judge an image of a man as a giant actually implies having different perspective from others and based on their sexes about human development, conditions, and values. Now, this difference or discrepancy between men and women were rediscovered in the field of social sciences during the time when efforts to eradicate gender discrimination were made. Now, we all know that scientific discoveries must be neutral, objective, consistent, and free of biases. But, however, in the later years, we began to see how we are already used to seeing our life in the eyes of men. And women were regarded in and constructed from masculine perspective, implicitly accepting the life of men as the norm. And this is known as observational bias, and it occurs when someone's expectations, opinions, and prejudices influences their perceptions. So, what are some examples of observational bias you can think of? I think you can comment it down below. Now, the tendency of developmental theorists to project a masculine image may be traced all the way back to Sigmund Freud. Freud patterned his theory of psychosexual development based on the experiences of a male child. And the Oedipus complex, we all know that, I think, is which is a psychoanalytic theory that states children have sexual desires for their opposite sex parents while viewing their same sex parents as their rival. And the complex is only resolved when children overcome their incestuous and competitive emotions and begin to view their same sex parents as their role model. Now, because of this theory, Freud tried to fit the experiences of women into his perspective. And he acknowledged that the one responsible for a woman's developmental failure, is her lack of penis. And he said that due to castration anxiety, the formation of a woman's superego, which is the heir to their Oedipus complex, is compromised. Because of this, he concluded that women show less sense of justice than men, and they are less easy to submit to the great exigencies of life, that they are more often influenced in their judgments by feelings of affection or hostility. Now, on the other hand, we have Robert Stoller. So he studies about gender identity, and Stoller states that personality formation, with a very rare exception, is permanent and irreversible for both sexes once the child turns 3 years old. So very specific. So since the primary caretaker of children in their first 3 years is usually women, the formation of their gender identity usually varies. So mothers tend to experience their daughters as a continuation of themselves, so it fuses the experiences of attachment in the process. On the other hand, mother sees their sons as their opposites. So the son usually separates themselves and they are defined as masculine. So as a result, male development equates to having more empathic individuation and a more defensive framing of experienced ego boundaries. So Stoller studies became Nancy's Chodorow's basis about her work on relationships, which highlighted the problem in women's development. So based on Stoller's take on personality formation, she stated that feminine personality identifies itself in connection to other people more than the masculine personality in any given society. So unlike Freud's masculine bias of psychoanalytic theory, Chodorow argued that sex differences does not equate to women having weaker ego boundaries or being more prone to psychosis. In fact, she claims that females have a better foundation for sympathy and empathy, and that regressing to pre-Oedipal relational models actually possess lesser damage to their ego. So girls perceive themselves as less differentiated than boys, more continuous with and related to their external environment, and they are differently oriented to themselves because they are parented by a person of the same gender. Moreover, relationships are experienced differently by men and women. Separation and individuation from their mothers are critical for developing masculinity for men, while femininity is defined through their attachment. And because of this, males tend to face difficulty with forming relationships, while females tend to face problems with individuation. So she said that male gender identity is threatened by intimacy, while female gender identity is threatened by separation. And based on this statement, Carol Gilligan argued that in psychological literature, the milestones of childhood and adolescent development are based on their ability to separate. Hence, a woman's failure to separate, by definition, is a failure to develop. Now, Chodorow studies about sex differences and personality formation are also seen in George Herbert Mead and John Piaget's studies about children's games. So, games provide a platform for role playing and experiencing themselves through the eyes of others. They also learn how to accept the rules and understand how to modify them. And in games, Piaget observed that between both sexes, boys have an increasing fascination for legal elaboration of rules and the development of fair procedures for judging conflicts, while girls have a more pragmatic attitude towards rules. They are more willing to make exceptions, they are reconciled easily due to the adjustments that they make. With that, Piaget came to the conclusion that girls' legal sense, which he thinks is necessary for moral development, is less developed than boys. Since Piaget argued that playing rule-bounded games is necessary for moral development of children, Lawrence Kohlberg added that they are most effectively learned through the opportunities for role-taking that arise in the course of resolving disputes. And unlike in the games played by boys, traditional games played by girls, like jump ropes, may mga traditional games like yung dito, luksong tinik, yan, yung mga ganyan, di ba? Mga batang kalye, di ba? Makaka-relate tayo dyan. So, unlike in the games played by boys, we girls, like, have fewer moral lessons now. Since the competition is indirect and the success of the winner does not necessarily signifies the failure of the other, according to Kohlberg. Now, Lever. Extending Piaget's studies, Janet Lever looked at whether there are sex differences in the games that children play. And boys, according to her research, play outside more frequently in larger and mixed age groups. They engage in more competitive games and they compete for longer periods of time because according to Lever, yung mga games ng boys are less boring and they are more effective in resolving fights. And in contrast, Lever stated that girls tend to end the game when a fight erupts. And these findings led her to conclude that males are better fit for achieving corporate success since they learn um, independence, since they learn independence, how to compete, and the skills that they need for managing large and diverse groups. So, on the other hand, the sensitivity and care that girls exhibit can impede their professional career. And they play in smaller, intimate groups that are more cooperative, which fosters the development of sympathy and sensitivity. So, for them to stand on their own, women must learn to how to act like men. Okay, both Chodorow and Lever's accounts suggest that both genders at puberty have different interpersonal orientations and social experiences. Puberty, according to Freud, is where young girls are transforming their masculine sexuality into the feminine sexuality of their adulthood. And it is where girls acknowledge and accept that they are indeed castrated, which brings a sense of humiliation and therefore leading to sense of inferiority. Erickson's well-known psychosocial stages of development, which is expanded on Freud's theory, however, only applies to the male child, as we can see here. Females, he said, put their identities on hold in order to attract men who will help her become known, promote her status, and fill her inner space to save her from loneliness and emptiness. Taray, di ba? For Erickson, the identity of man is forged in relation to the world, while the identity of women is awakened due to her intimate relationship with another person. So, in fact, Erickson's description of the identity of males and females is also seen in Bruno Bettelheim's description of fairy tales. The dynamics of male adolescence is typically seen in films such as Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, Hercules, Eren Yeager of Attack on Titan, Naruto, and more. These male characters typically face a huge dilemma during their adolescent years, in which they must identify their strengths in order to succeed in their battles. In contrast, the dynamics of female adolescence is depicted differently. You can see here Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. They are heroines who woke up from their slumbers not to control the world or to fight someone or to prove themselves, ganyan, but to marry a prince who saved them from evil witches. Well, active adventure is typically a masculine activity. According to Maxine Hong Kingston's book, The Woman Warrior, it is an autobiographical book. And if a woman were to participate on such adventures, she must at least dress like a man. For example, here, like Mulan. Thankfully, modern Disney today features heroines that can stand on their own 2 feet and not tied to a man. Now, with that, David McClellan came to the opinion that sex role is one of the most important drivers of human behavior based on these data. Well, data. However, because the scales were developed and standardized using men's interpretations, and data was gathered primarily or entirely from male studies, psychologists tended to treat male behavior as the norm and the female behavior as the deviation. And when women do not comply with the standard, the general consensus is that something is wrong with women. And that's all for my part. Let's proceed with Naomi.
So, what is it that was wrong with women? According to Martina Horner, it was their anxiety about competitive achievement or yung fear nila of success. By the way, si Martina Horner pala was known dahil sa inintroduce niya yung concept ng fear of success among women wherein she found out that women appear to have a problem with competitive achievement and that at times they were afraid to do or even achieve something even if they were so capable of doing it. Pero bakit? Bakit sila natatakot sa pag-attain ng success? It seems that this difficulty stems from a perceived conflict between femininity and success that happens during a woman's adolescence period. Kasi may conflict doon sa pag-integrate ng femininity na na-acquire niya during early childhood years and dun sa masculinity na nakuha niya from being competent sa school. Actually, here's a part of Horner's analysis wherein Anne finds herself at the top of her medical school class. Based on Horner's observation of women's performance during such situations of competitive achievement, napansin niya that when success is possible, women are threatened by its negative consequences, like social rejection and loss of femininity. Such perceptions increases their anxiety and decreases their positive achievement strivings. Meanwhile, aside from Horner's premise about success conflicts, George Assassin proposed another assumption wherein she said that it is possible na yung mga conflicts expressed by women ay dahil sa heightened perception nila of the other side of competitive success. What do we mean by the other side? Ito yung great emotional costs ng success na nape-perceive ng women due to competition. So, there might be an understanding that there is something wrong sa definition natin ng success as having better grades than everyone else, kung yung kapalit naman ito ay great emotional cost. Aside from this, Sasson also pointed out that Horner found out that women's fear of success only happens kapag yung achievement ay directly competitive, meaning one person's success was at the expense of another's failure. Additionally, please note na neurotic usually yung interpretation of fear of success ng women as mentioned by Hartley. Whereas here, in the next slide, Erikson defined a man who seems to be having a success conflict as the extraordinary workings of an extraordinary personality coming to the fore. And this man is George Bernard Shaw. Erikson cited him to elaborate his theory of identity crisis as Shaw, although defined as successful in his career, didn't like it in his 20s. To elaborate, Shaw is 70 years old at the time of the interview and is reflecting in his life. Sinabi niya that his crisis when he was 20 years old is caused not by his lack of success or recognition, but by too much of both. He described his negative feelings about his job that he then decided to quit it on March 1876 to settle down by writing and studying as he pleased. Unlike women, his refusal of success is not defined as neurotic, but rather extraordinary. Based on this, Gilligan said that we might begin to ask not why women have problems about competitive success, but why men show such readiness to adopt and celebrate a rather narrow vision of success. If you also remember yung discussion ni Beanca kanina about PJ and Lever's game observations, wherein yung boys ay mas concerned sa rules while yung girls naman ay mas concerned sa relationship even at the expense ng game, together with what Chodorow said na yung social orientation ng men ay positional while yung women ay personal, makikita natin na bakit kapag si Anne ang bida sa story ng competitive success, we label her as someone having the fear of success, pero kapag si John na yung bida, we see him as an extraordinary person. According to Gilligan, si John kasi ay perceived to have played by the rules and won, kaya mayroon siyang karapatan to feel good. Also, na-establish na rin niya yung kanyang positional sense of self. While si Anne, it is possible that the position that she obtained after being top of her medical school class is something that she doesn't even want. Sinabi nga ni Virginia Woolf that it is obvious that the values of women differ very often from the values which have been made by the other sex. However, it is the masculine values that prevail. Dahil dito, women question their feelings, doubt themselves, and alter their judgments out of respect sa opinion ng iba. Paradoxically, this criticism of Virginia Woolf towards women ay na-derive din niya sa values that she sees as strength ng women. So, women respect the opinion of others and they're sensitive to their needs kasi ito yung substance ng kanilang moral concern. Women also have this assumption that taking care of others is their responsibility kaya they often take into account yung opinion ng iba and hindi lang yung kanilang voices. Because of this deep concern for relationship and responsibilities, we may consider that women's moral weakness is also their moral strength. So, what is the woman's place in a man's life cycle? According to Gilligan, dahil women judge themselves in a context of human relationship and ability to care, she has been a nurturer, caretaker, and helpmate, a weaver of relationships wherein she turns to rely. Pero ayon, while women takes care of men, men as mentioned in their theories of personality, um, or psychological development, continue to devalue that care. Kasi kapag personal autonomy na kadalasang associated sa men, ang sign ng maturity, undesirable ang women dito dahil sa concern nila for relationship. Concern for relationships that appears to be a weakness rather than a human strength. Kaya these stereotypes suggest at a splitting of love and work wherein yung love is delegated sa mga babae and yung work is delegated sa mga lalaki. These stereotypes also reflects an imbalance adulthood kasi it favors yung separateness ng individual over connection to others. It also leans more toward an autonomous life of work than interdependence of love and care. Also, men only realize the importance ng intimacy, relationships, and care during their midlife, while women knew it from the beginning. Dahil sa assumption na ito, na alam ng women yung importance ng relationships, psychologists have neglected to describe yung development ng relationships sa males. So next, going to how this famous life cycle psychologist demonstrates women in their theories, let's start with Freud. Freud said that women's judgment are compromised dahil sa blind impartiality nila. While in Prejudice Moral Development, the girls are assigned in four brief entries and sa kabuuan ng research niya, the child are understood to be boys. Lastly, in KOHLBERG's theory, girls simply do not exist. They even equated the goodness of mature women to the third stage ng kanilang moral development sequence. Itong third stage na to is about helping and pleasing others, which they said to be functional in the lives of mature women kasi sa bahay lang yung buhay nila. Dinagdag pa nila na marirealize lang daw ng women na inadequate itong third stage when they entered the traditional male arena. Here lies actually another paradox because the very traits that traditionally define the goodness of women, like caring and sensitivity to others, are also those that mark them as inadequate dun sa moral theory ni KOHLBERG. So, given that the famous psychologists have focused their research on the lives of men, what would it look like when we begin to study yung developmental constructs naman ng women? First, we will find a moral conception different from that of Freud, Piaget, and KOHLBERG. Second, in this version, yung moral problem arises from conflicting responsibilities ng person rather than from competing rights. Yung resolution din ng problem na ito will stem from a mode of thinking that is contextual and narrative rather than formal and abstract. Finally, if theorists will focus on women, morality is centered in understanding of responsibility and relationships. Also, this moral problem construction of women may have been the reason kung bakit they failed to develop within the constraints of KOHLBERG systems. Kasi it should be noted that KOHLBERG defines the highest stages of moral development as a result of reflective understanding of human rights, wherein the morality of rights dito is different sa morality of responsibility kasi its emphasis is on separation rather than connection, and sa individual rather than sa relationship. To understand better, such is illustrated from the answers of two participants from KOHLBERG's study. So, eto, nandito yung naka-summarized version na. Here are the differences found sa answers ng participants kung saan isa ang babae at isa naman ang lalaki. From the answer of the 25-year-old male participant, KOHLBERG said that it illustrated the principal conception of human rights from his fifth and sixth stages that explains universal principles of justice. KOHLBERG also said that the male participant identifies morality with justice and recognition of the rights of others. Meanwhile, from the answer of the female participant, who is also 25 years old at the time of the interview and a third-year law student, it showed that the personal reconstruction of morality after a period of questioning and self-doubt. Pero this moral reconstruction of moral understanding is based sa kanyang strong sense of responsibility to the world rather than supremacy and universality of individual rights na makikita sa sagot ng male participant. So, mapapansin na nagkaroon ng shift sa moral dilemma from how to exercise one's right without interfering to others, as mentioned by the male participant, to how to lead a moral life that includes obligations to the self, family, and society, as mentioned by the female participant. In addition, when Kohlberg asked the female participant to describe herself, this is what she said. She values having other people that she is tied to and also having people that she is responsible to. She has a very strong sense of being responsible to the world, that she can't just live for her enjoyment, but just the fact of being in the world gives her an obligation to do what she can to make the world a better place to live in, no matter how small a scale that may be on. Therefore, while Kohlberg's male participant worries about people interfering with each other's rights, this woman worries the possibility of omission, of your not helping others when you could have helped them. This concern was addressed by Jane Loevinger's fifth autonomous stage of ego development, kung saan yung autonomy was placed in a context of relationship and defined as knowing how to adjust to an excessive sense of responsibility to others by recognizing that other people also has a responsibility of their own destiny. This autonomous stage resolves the problem that presented earlier, kung saan nagkakaroon ng conflicting responsibilities, especially yung mga babae, and it was replaced by a feeling for the complexity and multifaceted character of real people and real situations. Aside from that, it also focuses sa mga remaining conflicts. Hence, given yung mga pagkakaiba sa paratingin sa sarili at morality, women bring to the life cycle a different point of view and order human experience in terms of different priorities. So, to conclude the discussion, Gilligan cited McClelland's reference to the myth of Demeter and Persephone, which describes the feminine attitude towards power. McClelland also regarded it as a special presentation of feminine psychology. So, ayun, if you're not familiar with the story of Demeter and Persephone, si Persephone is the daughter of Demeter. And one day, while she's playing in the meadow with her girlfriends, nakakita siya ng narcissus flower, which she turns to pick up. Pagka-pick up niya ng flower, the earth opened up and she was snatched away by Hades into the underworld. Of course, her mother, Demeter, the goddess of earth, mourned her loss and she refused to allow anything to grow on land, and dahil dito, men and animals died. Because of this, Zeus persuaded Hades to return Persephone kay Demeter. But before Persephone left the underworld, she ate 6 pomegranate seeds, which ensured that she will spend half of the year on earth and half of the year in the underworld. Kasi di ba kapag kumain ka ng anything dun sa underworld, mag-stay ka na daw doon forever. And ito yung explanation daw actually kung bakit may 4 seasons na yung ibang bansa. Anyway, what does the story of Persephone reminds us? It reminds us that narcissism leads to death, and that the fertility of the earth is, in some mysterious way, tied to the continuation of the mother-daughter relationship, and that the life cycle itself arises from an alternation between the world of women and that of men. The story of Persephone also demonstrates the strengths of interdependence, building up resources, and giving that McClelland found in his research to be indicators of mature women. Hence, integrating Persephone's story into the discussion, we end with this. The women's place in man's life cycle is to protect attachments in a world wherein separation, autonomy, individuation, and natural rights are worshipped. That's all for now. Thank you.